Okay, get ready for a phenomenal chapter. Once again, you'll have opportunity to go deep into why or why not you have been moving forward in your purposed, best, finished life. So be ready with a pen and a journal. And here we go. Chapter 6. Prepare to finish. Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Jesus of Nazareth, Matthew 5:48. We have seen in prior chapters Jesus represents the perfect example of a finished life. He chose "it is finished," John 19:30, as the last words he spoke before giving up his spirit. The Greek word teleo, used in the original text of that verse, has been translated to the English word finished. Interestingly enough, when Jesus earlier in his life said, "Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect," Matthew 5:48, the Greek word that was translated into perfect is the same word teleo. Therefore, in Greek, the language of the New Testament, the same word teleo is used for the words finished and perfect. Let's examine the definition of this Greek word. Teleo means brought to its end, finished, wanting nothing necessary to completeness, perfect, that which is perfect. When Jesus taught his disciples about perfection in Matthew 5:48, he was really encouraging them to be perfect in finishing, in the same way as his heavenly Father is perfect, finished, and is finishing. Prepare to finish. Living your finished life will require times of ongoing and quite possibly intense preparation. A willingness to accept these times of preparation is a significant component to actually realizing your finished life. Jesus was willing to endure intense preparation so that he too would be prepared to respond appropriately when faced with varied situations. Below are several of many examples of how Jesus prepared for living his finished life. At age 12, Jesus was found in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and his answers. Luke 2:46-47. Even at a young age, Jesus was aware of his purpose, and so was fully engaged in preparation, maturing in wisdom, and developing the ability to communicate and discuss spiritual principles with religious leaders. Approximately 18 years later, it was time for Jesus to begin his public work. As was discussed in the previous chapter on humility, Jesus began his public ministry by receiving the water baptism from his cousin John the Baptist. As Jesus emerged from the water, his Father in heaven delighted in his obedience and humility. The heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him. And suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my Son, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Matthew 3:16-17. Without receiving the empowerment that came from the Spirit of God resting on him, Jesus would not have been adequately prepared for the situations and circumstances he would encounter on his journey to his finished life. With the Spirit of God upon him, Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tested by Satan. Immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. Mark 1:12. Talk about a rapid turn of events. The well-known prophet John the Baptist and now God the Father have publicly endorsed Jesus in a dramatic demonstration, and before Jesus had time to enjoy the moment, he was ushered into the desolation of the wilderness for 40 days of testing. And he, Jesus, was there in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and was with the wild beasts, and the angels ministered to him. Mark 1:13. What is significant to understand is that even though Jesus was his Son, God the Father knew he must be prepared prior to beginning his ministry. Jesus would face much testing and temptation on his journey to his finished life. It makes sense that a loving father would desire and require his son to be prepared and to be given the opportunity to prove himself ready for such an undertaking. I think about the brave men and women who serve their countries in armed forces. There is a process that individuals must go through, however, before joining the military. Physical and written exams, interviews, and much more is required just to be considered for entering the service. After acceptance, the enlistee must then go through boot camp, basic combat training. This is an intense process lasting several months where the new recruit is put through significant physical, emotional, and mental challenges to prepare them for the intensity of the battlefield. After successful completion, they are then assigned to a base where they will have additional focused training. Why all the hassle and expense? Why not just allow someone who wants to join the military to sign a waiver, give them a uniform and a gun, and then drop them on the front line of battle and say, go get 'em? Because untrained, unexercised soldiers on an active battlefield are not only a risk to themselves, but also to the other soldiers. It is quite likely this untrained soldier who would not know how to act under extreme conditions of an active battlefield would jeopardize the lives of the rest of the entire unit. In the same way, God required his son to experience boot camp, a period of intense training for the extreme conditions ahead. Before any public work in ministry began, before any miracles were performed, the Spirit of God led Jesus into an intense time of testing, 40 days without food, living among wild animals in hot, dry wilderness conditions, enduring the harassment of temptations by Satan. Now when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time. Luke 4:13. According to Luke, Jesus was tempted in every way, with every kind of temptation during his 40-day period. Jesus responded to the temptations of Satan by speaking the Word of God, Old Testament scriptures that he had undoubtedly studied and learned during his prior season of preparation as a young man. Isn't it interesting that something Jesus learned during a prior time of preparation would be needed in a latter time of testing? Jesus would later use on many occasions the lessons learned in the wilderness experience to pass the multitude of tests that came during his public work. This is one reason preparation is so important. Often tests come when we least expect them, and sometimes we don't even realize we're in a test until it's over. Therefore, we must prepare and be ready in advance. Jesus spent considerable time instructing and preparing his disciples so that they would be able to live their finished lives just as he did. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Luke 12:40. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Matthew 24:42-44. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Matthew 25:10. In the above-mentioned verses, Jesus is emphasizing the need to be prepared. Always be ready is the instruction. Why? Because you don't know the time when you will need to be. And when it's time, Jesus warns, you won't have the time to get ready. You're either prepared and ready when the opportunity appears, or you're not. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich, and he sought to see who Jesus was, but he could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. Luke 19:1-6. Zacchaeus, a wealthy but corrupt tax collector, desperately wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to see Jesus badly enough, in fact, that he humbled and quite possibly embarrassed himself by running through town ahead of Jesus and the crowds, and climbed into a large tree just so he could get a good glimpse of Jesus. Culturally, grown men, especially wealthy and notable men like Zacchaeus, never ran. They walked slowly in a distinguished fashion that allowed their long robes and tassels to flow. In order to run, Zacchaeus would have needed to hike up his robe in order not to trip over it. In doing so, he would have exposed his legs, which at this time was a cultural no-no. In our modern culture, running ahead of a crowd might seem like no big deal, but at that time, it was a significant demonstration of humility and desire on the part of Zacchaeus. This moment took premeditated planning and careful preparation on Zacchaeus' part. Let's see, he would need to be up in a tree well before Jesus and the crowds walked by, or else he would have been unable to see Jesus. Zacchaeus prepared himself so he could see Jesus, and God honored his preparation by allowing Jesus to see him. Because of the careful preparation and humility of Zacchaeus in this event, Jesus chose to eat and spend an entire evening at his house. Zacchaeus, so moved by his time with Jesus, seemingly in an instant, decided to give half his wealth to the poor and make restitution to those he had financially cheated by agreeing to restore 4 times the amount he had overcharged them. In response to Zacchaeus' desire to make things right with God, Jesus said, Today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Luke 19:9-10. What would Zacchaeus and his entire family have missed had Zacchaeus not been prepared? As the time drew closer for Jesus to finish his earthly assignment, he began to prepare the disciples for his departure. Jesus often told them, speaking about himself, that the Son of Man would be betrayed, beaten, and crucified. But out of their confusion, inability to understand, and fear at hearing this, they never asked him to discuss it further. Near the end of his life, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. His soul was distressed and sorrowful, so he invited Peter, James, and John to go with him. Jesus told Peter that he too was about to be tested. Jesus instructed him what to do before the test came, so he could be prepared for it when it came. Jesus instructed Peter in this way, Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. Mark 14:38. Instead of heeding Jesus' warning to him and remaining awake, alert, and praying, however, Peter fell asleep. Jesus gave Peter the opportunity to prepare for a test that he was going to face, but unfortunately, Peter did not recognize that the test was coming. After being arrested, Jesus was brought to the home of the high priest for questioning. Peter followed at a distance, and along with several others remained outside warming himself by the fire. A servant woman recognized him as being one of Jesus' disciples. Peter vehemently denied knowing Jesus 3 times. At that moment, the rooster crowed, just as Jesus predicted. Peter failed the test. Like Peter, often we too are in a test, but we do not recognize it until sometime later. At this point, it is too often late and to do anything about it, and which might mean we end up getting an opportunity to retake the test again sometime later. A key to practice and discipline that Jesus often modeled for us on the subject of preparation was to regularly take time to pray and fast. Here are just a few verses that provide insight into Jesus' own habits regarding prayer. Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he, Jesus, went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. Mark 1:35. So he often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. Luke 5:16. Now it came to pass in those days that he went to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. Luke 6:12. In addition to the discipline of prayer, Jesus modeled and taught the importance of incorporating fasting along with prayer. Below are several verses where Jesus is discussing how we are to fast. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Matthew 6:16 through 18. Jesus didn't say, if you fast. He said, when you fast. Living your finished life will at times require times of fasting. As we ponder that statement, let's examine the following scenario in Scripture. Then one of the crowd answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit, and wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples, and that they should cast it out, but they could not. He answered him, saying, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell to the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? And he said, From childhood, and often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you to come out of him and enter him no more. Then the spirit cried out and convulsed him greatly, and came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why could we not cast it out? So he said to him, This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. Mark 9:17 through 29. We see that Jesus lived a lifestyle that included regular times of prayer and fasting. Therefore, when situations arose that demanded greater levels of power and authority, Jesus was already prepared. In this story, Jesus did not ask for a time out. He didn't say, Wait a minute, guys, I need to go over here and pray before I heal this young man. Rather, the situation was presented to him. Jesus was prepared and ready. Because he had already been in prayer, he had already been practicing regular fasting. Have you ever found yourself in a difficult situation where you were so desperate for something that you incorporated a time of fasting? While there is nothing wrong with doing this, and I have done this myself, I wonder if we would actually need to do this emergency fasting if instead we instituted fasting as a regular part of our life. Jesus modeled praying and fasting as a lifestyle, not as an event that begins and ends. Private preparation creates opportunity for public demonstration. Jesus not only taught his disciples the importance of preparation, but he also demonstrated how they should prepare. Jesus contrasted how the disciples ought to prepare with the behavior of the religious leaders. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Matthew 6:6. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have spoken in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have spoken in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. Luke 12:2-3. At first reading, I interpreted this passage as a warning. Jesus seems to be saying, be careful of what you say and do, because you don't know when it will be exposed. Yet I do not believe that this is the primary message Jesus was trying to communicate. I believe in this passage, Jesus is encouraging his followers to do good deeds, to continue to prepare in secret without seeking public recognition, unlike the religious leaders of the day who loved the attention and the praise of others. Much of the work required to reach greatness in any field, industry, project, or organization happens when nobody else is around. For example, waking up early to spend time in prayer and meditation, exercising before starting your day, time spent working with your children on homework, the time you take to draw a bath for your spouse, the time you spend thinking about how to make whatever it is you're working on better, emails that you send at night so the next day can get off to a great start, making important phone calls to colleagues, business partners, and customers. These kinds of activities, for the most part, all happen in private, and yet I can tell you with 100% certainty it is the consistent performance of these unseen private activities and others like them that create successful positive outcomes that often lead to public recognition. Jesus offers practical advice for receiving a full reward. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their full reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Matthew 6:1-4. In this section of Scripture, Jesus warned that people who do good deeds, just so they will be seen by others, have already in fact received their reward. Therefore, God is no longer obligated to further reward them. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Matthew 6:6. Jesus instructs people to pray in secret, not like the religious leaders of his day who would go to the temple and out in the streets pray so they could be seen by everyone. According to Jesus, they have already received their rewards in full because the motive was to impress others with their dedication and righteousness. Instead, Jesus is telling us that when we pray, we should do it secretly so that only God can see it. If God is the only one who can see it, then he obligates himself to reward you publicly in the sight of others, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Matthew 6:18. Jesus is providing instruction for people who are fasting. He is instructing them not to go around with their heads down, looking famished, so that everyone will know they're fasting. Again, those who do this for the recognition of their deeds by others have received their reward in full, because people have been impressed with their level of righteousness for fasting. In recent years, I have fasted several times. Even though I know these scriptures, I have had to refrain from telling people about my fast. When having to make different food choices, if people are around, I found myself wanting to tell people that I was fasting, or maybe for some of the folks who are more spiritual than me, you don't want to tell people, but you hope that they ask you why you are eating differently. Fasting with a pure heart means that we go out of our way to keep it a secret. By going above and beyond to keep this a secret, you position yourselves for a full reward. When Jesus wanted to pray, he went to be alone. When he healed people, he often told people not to tell anyone what had taken place. When he or his disciples were tired, they withdrew from the public to get times of rest. Like all the principles of this book, Jesus not only taught the principles, but he also perfectly modeled them. Below are further examples of Jesus being intentional about seeking private times to pray and rest. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Mark 6:30-31. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Matthew 14:13. Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Luke 5:15-16. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was there alone. Matthew 14:23. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Mark 4:36-38. You cannot give away what you do not have. Therefore, taking time to rest and pray is necessary to refuel, refill, and recharge as you pursue the path of living out your finished life. Many people burn out or experience unneeded consequences due to not being intentional about rest and private time for maintaining personal intimacy and connection with God. This was something Jesus continued to remind us of, his dependency on hearing and seeing what his Father was doing in order for Jesus to know how to best serve the people. Finishing through serving. If anyone desires to be first, he shall be the last of all, and the servant of all. Mark 9:35. During a walk from Galilee to Capernaum, Jesus observed the disciples having an argument. After arriving at a home in Capernaum, Jesus asked his disciples, "What was it that you disputed among yourselves on the road?" But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest. And he sat down, called the 12 to him, and said of them, "If anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all." Mark 9:33-35. On a walk to Jerusalem, Jesus gathered the 12 disciples and spoke to them. "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant, and whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Matthew 20:25-28. In this short exchange, Jesus laid out exactly how to become the greatest, and that is to be last of all and to serve all. Again, Jesus began being the perfect model of the finished life, modeled both of the keys to greatness. In another conversation, Jesus, speaking to the multitudes and to the disciples, taught this: "He who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." Matthew 23:11 and 12. After eating a meal with the disciples before the feast of the Passover, Jesus proceeded to wash the feet of the disciples. It is after he washed all their feet that he said the following to them: "You call me teacher and Lord, and you say well, for so I am. And if I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." John 13:13 through 17. Again, here we see Jesus not just teaching about serving, but modeling it by humbling himself and washing the feet of his disciples. Jesus also promises a blessing for those who serve. He states that it is important not just to know the importance of serving, but to actually act on that knowledge and serve. Jesus directly connects the greatness of service. He clearly states that the path to greatness is service to others. And he goes on to say, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. John 13:17. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sicknesses and all kinds of disease among the people. Then his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. Matthew 4:23 through 25. Jesus, as he went from place to place, teaching and preaching the good news of the kingdom, healed all who were brought to him. He served people, regardless of their social and occupational positions, financial statuses, and health statuses. Jesus took time to heal all who came to him out of a commitment to living his finished life. Jesus served his earthly father Joseph by working with him in the family business. Jesus served the many people in the crowds by teaching them about the kingdom. Jesus served by healing all who came to him. Jesus served by feeding many. Jesus served by mentoring the disciples. Jesus ultimately served all mankind by doing what only he could do, by being the final perfect sacrifice for the sin of humankind on the cross. Living your finished life will require a lifestyle of service. Your passion, prosperity, and fulfillment is found in serving others in alignment with your purpose. Service to many leads to greatness. Living your finished life will require working to the service of others. In order to finish, you will need a willingness to do the work required. Every great idea, project, or pursuit at some point boils down to a lot of hard work. Finishers are not just around for the creative brainstorming phase of a project and then go missing in action when it's time to get to work. They are not only able to cast vision and purpose, but also are willing to roll up their sleeves and serve alongside anyone who will serve them. Finishing often requires going places where others are not willing to go, and doing things others are not willing to do. Being willing to go where your purpose requires is a key determinant in the impact of your work and your life. Living your finished life will require that you identify the key activities or metrics that best measure the impact that you are creating in the area of your work. Maintaining a high level of productivity is important to living the finished life and something that Jesus modeled. Here are several passages where Jesus is teaching about the importance of work and how he finished through serving. But Jesus answered them, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." John 5:17. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. John 21:25. But what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, "Son, go work today in my vineyard." And he answered and said, "I will not." But afterward he regretted it and went. Then he came to the second son and said likewise. And he answered him, "I will go, sir." But he did not. Which one of the 2 did the will of his father? Matthew 21:28 through 31. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. John 9:4. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." John 11:41-42. Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to finish his work." John 4:34. For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." John 5:16-17. And he who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I always do the things that please him. John 8:29. Finishing touches. Do you desire to be great and make an impact on others? Pause the recording right here and answer, do you see how you can be great by serving others and working in your purpose? Take some time to explain. Question 2. How many people are you and/or your company or organization or project serving on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis? Who and where are the people you serve? Take some time here to reflect. Question 3. Are you satisfied with the number of people and the level of service you and your organization are providing? Pause here and write down your explanation. Question 4. Identify areas that you are committed to improving. Question 5. Are you willing to become a better servant? How will you plan to serve? Question 6. What are 2 or 3 of the most important activities that generate income or advance your mission or project? Please make sure that you have identified the right activities. Ask someone who is significantly more successful than you in this area of focus to get confirmation that you have identified the right activities that will provide service. Question 7. How much of each activity listed above do you need to do on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis to achieve your goals and dreams for the project? Question 8. Block time on your calendar to perform the amount of activity identified above. Now, how will you identify and review your activities in time to ensure that you have the appropriate level to produce desired outcome? Now that you have identified the key activities and how to keep an account of them, you have established a practice that will protect you from one of the greatest threats of your finished life. The biggest benefit to keep track of the activities you are committed to doing in the advancement of your purpose is to keep yourself free from deception. I assert that deception is one of the scariest things in the world. Deception is a dangerous state in which someone believes and has accepted a lie as truth. Believing a lie to be truth empowers the lie and the liar. The deceived is left making miscalculated decisions and taking ineffective action. The longer someone is in this condition, the further off course they go. I know from my experience coaching thousands of people, in addition to my own life, that it is easy to fall prey to this state of deception. As Chris Valentin, Senior Associate Leader of Bethel Church in Redding, California, states, there are only two ways out of deception. One is certainly better than the other. If someone remains in deception too long, as time goes on, there is a compounding negative impact of the series of mistakes and misguided actions that eventually result in a major crash and burn. Not only have I had the unique experience of seeing the damage caused by deception in the lives of others, but I too have been the pilot at the helm of several expeditions that mercifully ended in a crash and burn. When things crash and burn, there is often significant loss and collateral damage. Survival is the best case scenario. The much better way out of deception is to have one or more quality people in your life whom you trust more than yourself. When things aren't going well, you can turn to these people for help, or more likely these people will come to you if you see things going the wrong direction. Even though you will not agree with them, and you will believe with every ounce of your being they are 100% wrong, you will need to listen to them if you want to avert the crash and burn. Who or whom do you trust more than yourself? Take a moment to write their names down. Do they know that you trust them in this way? Have you given them permission to come to you if they see you are doing things that are not in alignment with your character and purpose? If you do not have anyone in your life like this, or if you answered no to these questions, I implore you to remedy this as soon as possible. Now wouldn't be soon enough. In addition to having people in your life whom you trust more than yourself, you can use numbers as a backstop to keeping you out of deception. I have the privilege of speaking with people all the time about their businesses and or projects. They speak with great passion and they share what they are absolutely committed to seeing the business or project succeed. After they finish their emotionally charged story regarding their project or business, I can quickly find out by asking a few questions this individual's level of commitment to the project. As an example, let's assume this person is involved in a business or project that requires sales to new customers. The answers to the following questions will reveal this individual's seriousness about their business. How many phone calls did you make this week to prospective customers? How many appointments did you have in the past week with prospective customers? How many customers did you add to your business last week? As stated earlier, I have had the opportunity to coach hundreds of people and ask them these questions. I have yet to have a person be able to actually tell me the exact number off the top of his or her head. Most people attempt to trace their steps for the past week and at best offer a guesstimate. Often, when asked these quantitative questions about their productivity, people almost always start by telling me a story about last week, which for the most part is being positioned as an excuse for their level of inactivity. I politely stop them in their story and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, but the only acceptable answer to these questions are numbers." When the questions begin with how many, the only proper answer is a number. By keeping score and being present and connected to your numbers, it will keep you out of deception that you are advancing your business or project while you are actually while your actual activity and production is saying something else. Numbers are not the only thing that matter, but they certainly make things easier to measure. The numbers that you should be tracking on daily, weekly, and monthly basis will vary depending upon your business or project. Here are some more finishing touch questions. Pause in between each one that you may write down your answer. Question 1. Do you have a morning success routine that sets you up to win the rest of your day? If not, what will you start doing before you begin your day to set you up to succeed? Question 2. What are you doing in private that is working against the future you intend to create? Question 3. What are you doing in private that is out of integrity for what you stand for? Question 4. Consider your current level of prayer. Explain. Question 5. Consider your current level of fasting in your life. Explain. Question 6. Do you believe your present level of prayer and fasting is adequate preparation for living your finished life? Question 7. What benefits do you expect to see from fasting? Question 8. How will you know what is working? How will you measure it? And question 9. Are you committed to earnestly seeking God about what it is and how He wants you to fast? Explain.